Hey guys, James here from Appalachian DIY. So we have this Chrysler 300M 1999, and it's got a code P1391 having to do with the crank sensor signal intermittent loss. So the cam sensor is easy enough. It's right here. You do have to unbolt the intake and kind of lift it up a little bit to actually pull the cam sensor out. But I've got a second one here that we wanted to try, and just kind of because it was easy, just to see if that's what's causing it. Because the common problems for the P1391 are going to be a bad cam sensor, timing belt that's jumped, or the tone wheel, which is right behind this on this cam gear. Um, the tone wheel could be of the wrong year, it could be bent, it could be damaged, it could be missing teeth off of cam gear. So basically it's going to be one of the three things: cam sensor, something to do with the tone wheel, or the timing belt itself has jumped, or something like that. So we've already swapped out the cam sensors, and that didn't seem to do anything. So the next step is to pull this timing cover, which isn't too bad. You're going to have to pull the belt off and this tensioner pulley right here. So we'll go ahead and do that, and we're going to inspect this, because this is going to be the next easiest thing to do, is inspect this tone wheel and see what's going on with it. Hey guys, so I pulled this timing cover off here, and if you look very closely you can see that the pattern holes in the tone wheel, there's actually a bend right there. If you look closely you can see it. This is the only spot that I could get with the camera, but actually several of the other pattern holes are actually bent as well. But one other thing I wanted to add, I apologize, I don't always think about what I'm saying when I'm making these videos, but another thing to think about that could cause this code P1391 is a crank sensor failure as well, or a flywheel problem. So the way these Dodges work is there's a tone wheel on the flywheel, just like there's a tone wheel here on this cam gear, and the crank sensor will read the pattern in the tone wheel on the flywheel, and the cam sensor will read the pattern in the tone wheel on this cam gear. So say if it can't read the signal from the cam sensor, it's going to go off basically just what it's reading from the crank sensor. If it can't read the other, it's going to try and read the cam sensor. The correct way to actually diagnose this code is to hook up an oscilloscope or a scan tool that has the ability to basically an oscilloscope type function, like say a Snap-on Veris or something like that, that can read these signals in milliseconds. This is going to be the correct way to diagnose this, and what you're going to be looking for is signal from the crank sensor, signal from the cam sensor, and the sync between the two. You should see a sync, a pattern. If you're not seeing signal from one or the other, then you can suspect that that sensor is probably bad. If you're seeing an irregular pattern from the cam or the crank sensor, then you can suspect that there's probably a problem with either the tone wheel, or maybe even a wiring problem. If it's an intermittent loss, which is what this code P1391 is, it could be a partially broken wire, or even just a sensor that fails sometimes and sometimes it doesn't. A lot of times the cam sensor will actually fail only when it gets hot. So you may notice when you start the car in the morning, it works fine, but after it heats up, it'll start skipping, misfiring, and it'll throw this check engine light for the code P1391. In this particular instance, it was actually a problem with the tone wheel on the cam gear, which isn't as common as, say, the cam sensor or the crank sensor failing, or both failing. The story behind this car is that either the timing belt broke or the water pump blew when the customer was driving it. He towed it home, I guess, and decided to replace the timing belt and the water pump himself. He, for whatever reason, or he didn't time it right. One of the cams was off a tooth. He ended up bending some valves, got a head job done, and it's still having this problem. So timing belt's on now. It's where it should be. The valves have been fixed. It has rebuilt heads on it. So all that stuff's been done, but we're still getting this issue of this code P1391. So on close inspection, we see that the cam gear is actually bent, and which could have happened whenever he was doing the timing belt. It could have happened if the timing belt broke. There's really no telling how it actually happened. All that matters is that the holes on the cam gear are damaged, or on the tone wheel of the cam gear are actually damaged. So in this case, we're replacing the actual cam gear. Uh, this is less common than, say, the cam sensor or the crank sensor failing. Really, if you're doing it at home without a scan tool or an oscilloscope, uh, you can kind of guess at one. Your options are, like I said, crank sensor, cam sensor, timing belt, um, or cam gear or flywheel. The easiest things to do, or actually I would say the free thing to do initially, is to pull the timing cover off and check to see if the timing belt's in time and if there's any damage. That won't cost you any money. It'll cost you a little time. Um, uh, but other than that, if you don't have a scan tool, which is what you really need to identify this and diagnose this problem correctly, if you don't have a scan tool, you can opt to replace the cam sensor or the crank sensor. Replace one at a time and see, if the problem goes away. Um, so really, that's about all you can do without the proper tools for the diagnosis. In this case, we got lucky, I guess, and noticed a problem with the cam gear before spending any real money or any huge amounts of time. We already knew the backstory on it, so the timing belt was really the first place to look, because we already knew that the customer had attempted to do this job himself, and that doesn't always go very well. So anyway, I hope this helps. Any questions on the P1391? I spent a lot of time on this car, so I should be able to answer anything that you have related to this code. So thanks for watching, and good luck.